GPT wrapper has kind of, become like a derogatory thing, but I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. If you look at Perplexity, people could call that a Chat GPT wrapper or a Claude wrapper or something. I think they're valued at like $5 billion or something, and Jeff Bezos is invested in them. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for you.
At the end of the day, to build a good business is not just about technology. If you can solve a problem and deliver a great outcome and delight customers, people are happy.
Welcome back to the Superhuman AI podcast, where we talk about everything that's going on in AI and how you can use it. Today, we're going to try something slightly different. So some of you may know this, but I'm assuming a lot of listeners don't know this, but my co-host Hassan has built and sold 2 8-figure AI companies. I worked as an executive at a few big companies before, and then, I have the newsletter as well that is currently doing a few million in revenue. We're not here to sort of like brag about our accomplishments, but the main thing here is that Hassan and I both spend a ton of time talking about product ideas and how we can build different apps and how we can launch different ideas. So with that being said, Hassan, do you want to quickly say hi, and then we can just hop into all the different ways that we are finding these product ideas?
Yeah, so very excited to chat with you guys and do something different. Usually we always have guests over and we interview them, but this time we thought that there's a lot of people out there who want to build things. The moat of building has become a bit more lower, or it's easier to build because of all these amazing technologies in the AI space like Vercel, Cursor, etc. So we just wanted to share with you some of the methodologies we are using to find opportunities, so you can get started. At the end of the day, whatever ideas you have to just start building and executing. But we just wanted to get you a starting point if you don't even know how to find an idea. So hopefully this is helpful and you guys have some fun.
Yeah, awesome, man. I think that's often the hardest part as well. Like, what should I go work on? Like, if I'm going to spend, if it's a side project, if I'm going to spend 10 hours a week on this as a side project, sacrifice my weekends, work late at night, or, if I'm just going to quit my job, go work on this thing, like this could be the next 2, 5, 10 years of my life. So, I think execution matters as well, but the idea matters as well. And you need to feel both conviction and excitement for the idea. So, let's not keep the readers waiting. The first method that both of us use to find interesting ideas, and this is something we were talking to the CEO of Ada, Mike Murchison, last week. He's built $1 billion company, and he sort of, said this, and, just like a light bulb went off in both of our heads. I don't know, there's no name for it, but we're just going to call it the OpEx attack. And OpEx stands for operational expenditures. So anything related to our business could be salaries, could be the money you're spending on apps, could be money spent on contractors. Basically anything, could even be the rent that you're spending on your building. So Hassan, I'm just going to hand it over to you. Do you want to explain this idea a little bit of what the OpEx attack is?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the way to think about this is that what's happening in the AI space is that the agent architecture is really growing. What are these agents? These agents are digital machines or digital co-pilots, or assistants for humans, which are becoming available, and they're pretty good at some of their job. They're in some cases as good as a junior employee. They can do some basic coding things to make software much faster. I think Google in their Q3 or Q2 report said around 20-30% of their code was done by different Copilot use cases. GitHub has some really good data. So people are starting using those things. You have sales assistants, you have marketing assistants. So these are all these agentic workflows which are in essence helping you do your job. So a lot of significant component of OpEx ends up being employee costs. So that's one example of that. And then there are other small things like rent, etc. CapEx, on the other hand, is R&D budgets. Hey, you're investing in technology and those type of things, which you may kind of get some benefit down the road, but it's not hey, tomorrow you have to pay this cost to keep the business running. I'm pretty excited about the OpEx model. The reason being that I think we are in this new age of revolutions then, right? If you think about this, right, we had the Industrial Revolution, we had the dot-com era, and AI is just reshaping how we interact as humans, how it will interact with machines, how companies will be run. And really the value creation is going to expand. I think first time companies passed $1 trillion, I was blown away.
Yeah, that was mind-blowing.
I think we'll have multiple $10 trillion companies soon because, AI is just going to expand the value creation and the abundance we can all have. So it's not hey, OpEx, like, hey, you will have like less employees and like suddenly like the cost is going to go down. What it means is that like people who have good skills, good outcomes, can deliver good value, they will just be valued more.
So I'll just give a couple of examples. So I think a good example here is Harvey AI. I think they're valued at $1 billion and they basically help lawyer. So if you picked up the balance sheet of a law firm and you looked at it, I think most of the expense there is just the lawyers and the billable hours. And if you look at what those lawyers are spending time on, a lot of the time they're spending time on discovery. They're looking at documents. They're trying to find different facts and evidence and so on that they can go present and build up their cases. So yeah, that's basically just looking through documents and finding things is a big part of a lawyer's job. And what Harvey AI basically does is it looks at those documents, legal documents, and it helps you sort of speed up the discovery process and find things faster. So as a lawyer, if you might have been spending let's just call it, I don't know, like if you're working 60 hours a week, maybe you're spending 30 to 40 hours on discovery and looking through all these documents. Maybe now you're spending half of that, right? Suddenly you have those 10, 15 hours back and you can go spend them on other things. That's great both for the employees, for the lawyers who don't want to spend time doing a lot of that stuff. And it's great for the law firms as well, because that means that their lawyers can go work on more high value things. Just to give us a very concrete example of how I've done this or how I've noticed this in the newsletter business as well. So for folks listening in who might not know this, I founded a newsletter called Superhuman AI, getting close to 1 million readers at this point. The way that the newsletter got started was, I was writing the newsletter myself, but at some point I noticed that just a bland newsletter without images isn't going to cut it. So what I did is I went and looked for a designer. Now, it turns out, number one, designers are expensive. Number two, I needed a lot of images. Number three, I needed them fast. And, I would have ended up spending a few $1,000s a month just doing this. And again, it would have been a very slow process. And sometimes there's breaking news at midnight and the newsletter is going to go out at 6 a.m. So how do I get an image and get it in? Practically impossible to do that. So both from a money perspective, time perspective. So at that time, I started using Midjourney. Now, Midjourney isn't an agent product specifically, but it does generate images. So instead of basically, me having to spend thousands of dollars hiring a designer, I was just using Midjourney to put out images. As an entrepreneur who was trying to, working a full-time job at the time, was, kind of doing this out of my own pocket, being able to do this with Midjourney for $20 a month and getting thousands of images almost instantly if I wanted to was way better than having to go hire someone and do this, right? This is an opportunity for us to look at that OpEx and build a product around that expense. Hassan, those are just sort of like, two examples that I have in my head. Is there anything specific that pops to mind for you?
I think like software is a great example, right? Like if you think about technology, what is the highest cost for a lot of these technology companies is hiring their engineers.
100%.
And I think that's why you see a lot of companies attacking the software space.
Yeah.
You have Bolt, you have Vercel. All of them are making it easier and easier for like deploying stuff. Like we use Bolt and Vercel to ship stuff,
Yeah.
which is awesome. I use Cursor, like I've not coded for like several years. I just got back to coding again, and Cursor has been amazing for someone who's been very rusty at coding. So I think that's like a very specific example which comes to mind, right? Like as a software company, most probably more than 50% of your OpEx is software engineering. And
100%.
if you can cut that even by like 10%, 20%, massive value. And that's why I think like there are multiple companies attacking this problem, not just one of them.
Great. Awesome. So let's get specific, right? So let's just say you are listening to this podcast at this time. You're like, okay, I'm going to go use this OpEx method and I'm going to go find a new business idea. Where specifically can we go find these OpExes?
No, I was just going to say, like, I think like the first area I would do is that like I will just pick an industry, like which industry you feel like you have domain expertise on, because obviously every industry is OpEx. Once you, let's say, pick up the industry, let's say healthcare as an example, you're like, okay, within healthcare, there's insurance, there's payer, there's pharmaceutical, there's hospitals, there are like service providers. Okay, what subcategory of this you want to pick? You pick that subcategory. Just take some of those public companies and pick up their 10K and read their 10K. And on their 10K, look at their balance sheet, look at their income statement, look at their P&L, and just try to understand like, hey, where's the money being spent? Read the subjective overview from their company CEO to say like, hey, what are the biggest challenges they're facing on the operational side? And
Yeah.
that will give you some initial ideas. So if you already have some expertise in that industry, something may click. There might be some interesting things which might pop.
Yeah, and again, right? Like again, let's make it even simpler. Like let's just say you don't know how to read a financial statement, no problem. Just upload the financial statement or the annual or quarterly report into Chat GPT or Claude, whatever you're using. Just ask it to analyze it and give you like what the big things are that this company is spending money on, and just ask follow-up questions. And boom, there you have it, right? I'd say that is the simplest way to do it if you don't want to leave your desk and just want to kind of do it at the convenience of from the convenience of your couch. So this next one is called the Feature Arbitrage. This is also a great method to find new product ideas. So essentially what the product arbitrage is, whenever a big AI company, especially the ones that are making models like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and so on, every time they put out a new feature on their model, that is an opportunity for you to go build a product on top of that feature. So a couple of months ago, in fact, it was one of our first podcast episodes, I think, was with this guy who had basically, his name is Blake Anderson. If you guys want to go check out that episode, what he basically did is he saw that ChatGPT had released the image recognition feature on their API. And what he basically did is he took that and he built an app. He built a dating app. So essentially, if you're on a dating app, you don't know what to say next. You take a screenshot, you upload it into that app. I think it's called Plug AI, and then Plug AI basically gives you your next, pickup line or whatever else that is. We had another guest on the podcast. David Park built Jenny AI. I think they're getting close to $10 million in revenue now. Again, completely bootstrapped, no venture capital situation here. Just two college kids. They played around with GPT-2 and they just basically said, hey, we're just going to take this API and we're going to build a product for students. So, now everyone knows, hey, you can go ask ChatGPT questions about essays and assignments and college research and so on. But they were one of the first to do that. And that ended up being massively lucrative for them. So yeah, I think feature arbitrage, just keep an eye out. You can go to Twitter, you can go to company websites, you can keep a tab on the news, you can obviously read our newsletter and stay on top of everything that's getting released on top of the models. That being said, Hassan, I'll hand it over to you. Like, what are your thoughts around this, right? Like, can you think of any ideas here?
I think what's really interesting about feature arbitrage is that for someone who is like, hey, I'm not really sure if I'm an entrepreneur, I don't really know if I will be like even successful building. I think feature arbitrage is a great way of like testing out this. If you really want to do and you don't want to look back 10 years from now and be like, hey, I didn't like try something. I think feature arbitrage is a great way to do that, right? Because you already have a great API, a lot of infrastructure around like stack around that. It may take you a few evenings, few weekends to ship something, talk to users, really have that loop of shipping a product, talking to a user, getting feedback, iterating on that. So I think it's a great way of learning. And if you end up like finding something niche which makes money, holy shit, this is amazing. I think like feature arbitrage is great, especially for folks who are just starting out, are not really 100% sure about like, hey, what to do, but they just want to get their hands dirty, a bit of like experience. This is I think the simplest way of doing it with the lowest friction, where you can ship something, talk to users, get what the full life cycle of building something looks like, without kind of worrying about like, hey, do I need to quit my job? Do I need to like, go raise money? Do I need to like hire someone?
Yeah. I also think, like GPT wrapper has kind of, become like a derogatory thing. But I just want to say, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that, right? Like Uber was built on
100%.
Yeah, Uber was built
100%.
on top of AWS. Doesn't make Uber an AWS wrapper. Like it's a huge company. Tons of apps get built on a bunch of innovations that Apple did. So if you're building an iOS app, that doesn't make you an App Store wrapper or iOS wrapper or a Swift wrapper. I think that's kind of a ridiculous argument to be making. Obviously, that means once the technology is out there and publicly available, anyone else can go build that. So you probably will get more competition. Maybe not the most defensible idea. But if you're starting out, and again, we said $1 million idea, not $1 billion idea.
Oh, there's so many $1 million ideas like in this arbitrage. And on the abstraction stuff, like Zain, like I think I saw some clip or some tweet on Twitter where like the Perplexity CEO had just like said like, hey, like, we used to get a lot like, hey, you're just a GPT wrapper, just wrapper on top of OpenAI or Anthropic. And he said like, a lot of companies are wrappers if you really think about this, right? Like Salesforce was built on top of like the Oracle database, and there's an abstraction layer. A lot of companies abstract the complexity to make their life easy for users, right? I think in this AI wave, this wrapper and abstraction layer is much more seeable. The reason is that the technology is more accessible
Yeah.
because Chat GPT or Anthropic is accessible. But I think a lot of companies before also were an abstraction layer, and you've talked about it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think people forget that at the end of the day, to build a good business is not just about technology; it's about delivering an outcome,
Yeah.
solving a problem. And if you can solve a problem and deliver a great outcome and delight customers, people are happy.
I always come back to this. It's like, I think the core of entrepreneurship is just building things people want and ideally things that people want to pay for. So, if you look at Perplexity, someone could, people could call that a Chat GPT wrapper or a Claude wrapper or something. But I think they recently raised, I think they're valued at like $5 billion or something. And Jeff Bezos is invested in them and a few other big names. So, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for you. Don't let the whole GPT wrapper thing hold you back. It's definitely not holding us back. Like Hassan and I are building apps. Like, some of them are a little bit more proprietary, but some of them are just straight up, GPT wrappers. We don't care. If it solves a valid problem for people and businesses, who cares how the whole thing got built? So the next method that we have for finding product ideas is called the Personal Problem Goldmine. And I'm going to start this off with a quote from Paul Graham, who's the co-founder of Y Combinator, the startup incubators that's incubated companies like DoorDash, Airbnb, Reddit, and so many more. So I'm just going to look at my screen and read the quote because I don't want to get it wrong. And the quote is, "The way to get startup ideas is not to try to think of startup ideas. It's to look for problems, preferably problems you have yourself." Right? So Hassan and I know this because, so many of the products that we've built for ourselves have been solving our own problems. But the best way to find an idea for a product sometime is to just look at the problems you have yourself and solve for them, right? And the reason for that is if you have that problem, chances are there are hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of people out there who are facing the same problem. Hassan, do you want to go ahead and give some examples there or add some context?
Yeah, I think like the personal problem framework is a solid one, right? One, the benefit of this is that you understand the domain of like what this problem like set looks like. You have most probably tried to solve it in some way or form by using vendors or using products on the market, and nothing has really worked. So what you've concluded is that like, hey, no one is really solving this problem the way it needs to be solved. This is a problem. And third, if you sit in a reasonable position where you're like, hey, people are willing to pay money for that, because when you talk to your friends in other companies or other adjacent spaces in your industry, they're like, yeah, like this, like I will pay for this. Suddenly you validated a market. It's so much easier to like build something around a personal problem. But I think like one key thing is that like you also need to understand the scale of the personal problem, right?
Yeah.
Like that is important as well, right? Like I could have a problem where like, hey, dog walking is a massive issue for me. I would love like to have like a dog walker in my neighborhood. I build a sharing app. Sure, this may work, but is it like going to build like a massive company? I'm not really sure. But if I'm sitting in the insurance industry and I'm like, hey, like people have massive issue building their companies have like massive issues building insurance plans in the US for like their employees. And I think that's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah.
If you even like solve like a 10% of that, you can build like a massive billion-dollar. There's a clear kind of like TAM to go attack.
Yeah.
So I think that's a key thing for people to kind of like differentiate. A personal problem you find at home or something may not be a big problem. It could be, but you really need to like understand the market and the TAM before you say like, hey, is this personal problem worth attacking?
I think the great thing about this personal problem goldmine method is most startups fail because they don't have product market fit. And not having product market fit basically just means you haven't built something that people want or people want to pay for. And the reason that happens is because you think that a problem exists and then you go build a solution for it. And, one of two things happens when your startup fails. Like you either either the problem didn't exist and you kind of just like overestimated the problem, or second, you built a solution that didn't really fix a problem.
Look for things which are missing. Look for things which are broken. Look for things which look weird to you. And the crazy part of great ideas are that like something which looks crazy to you may not look crazy to like 50 other people around you, but there might be like 2 other people who will be like, yeah, that sounds crazy. That doesn't mean like it's a bad idea. That means like people have just not realized this is something broken because the status quo is so good. And that could be a great idea. as an example. I
Yeah.
think example of this is when Uber and Airbnb started, the concept of the sharing economy was just non-existent. It felt weird for people to say like, hey, I'm going to rent my place on this application. A random stranger is going to show up and stay at my place. The hotels are for that. Motels are for that.
Yeah.
Why would I do this for a day? Uber, so I'm gonna like get into this stranger's car and they're just gonna drive me like but
100%.
what about taxis? Like that's kind of the status quo, right? It's just like sometimes at the onset of the idea which you really believe in, there may not be a lot of supporters for you, but you just find something broken as well and you feel strong conviction, you just have to keep talking to a lot of folks and users because there will be other believers like you. You just need to make sure that there are, but there's also like put a time parameter. I think that's another important thing, right? Don't spend like 5 years just like, oh, I'm gonna go like find this idea, and for 5 years just like spending time on idea. You know, after a few months, you just gotta ship. You gotta build and you gotta go put something out there and see if people are willing to pay for it or use it.
Yeah.
If they're not, then maybe the market is just not ready for that right now. Or maybe this is not a good idea. So be willing
Yeah.
to take feedback as well. I think that I want to mention these two things because sometimes I meet founders who have just been working on an idea for like 5-6 years and the company is just not going anywhere since they started to where they are.
Exactly.
And I greatly appreciate the conviction and like their willingness to keep going. But sometimes, you know, like it may just not be a good idea, or maybe like what you're building is just not wanted by the market. That's I think something important to be like have self-reflection and be able to like understand as well.
Yeah. I want to add a couple of more specific tactics around this personal problem Goldmine method. So first of all, let's just say you have a problem. You want to make sure that there's no solution out there, right? So for example, if there's a ton of solutions out there, then that problem might have already been solved. So just go run a quick Google search and a quick search on the App Store. If you find a ton of apps with, strong reviews and strong revenue and so on that are solving that problem, that may be, maybe not the best idea to go pursue. But if you have that problem, if you go look on, if you go look on Reddit, if you go look on Google, if you go look on the App Store, and you can't find any product that solves that problem or solves it well enough, then that's an opportunity right there. So another great example that I want to add here is just how we built the newsletter. So the newsletter basically was made using the personal problem Goldmine method. So I wanted to learn about AI, and basically what Hassan does is Hassan hands me over this book called Deep Learning. It's an extremely complicated and hard book. I got some parts of it, but frankly, most of it kind of flew over my head. So I went online to look for a lot of this information, found a few books, but everything was either just like too technical or too boring or it just didn't make sense to me. So I said, you know what? I'm facing this problem. I've been trying to learn about AI for a few months now. This shouldn't be this hard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go create some content online on Twitter and see, if there's traction. So now that I spent a few months, kind of learning about AI and a few different things, I started writing threads on Twitter. Boom. Within like a couple of weeks, getting a lot of traction. And the way that I launched it is I just basically, every time I would post a thread on Twitter, now called X, at the bottom, I just have a call to action saying, hey, if you want to learn more about AI, just follow my newsletter. It goes out once a week. It goes out 5 days a week now, but back then it went out 1 day a week. And I'd say, hey, if 10,000 people sign up within the first month, yeah, I'm just going to go write this thing. So again, I had a problem. I knew this problem existed. Now, the next step for me was I was trying to validate does this problem exist for other people?
I'll just love to add here, right? Like, so like Zain, when he was trying to like play with this content creation space, right? Like, it's not like the newsletter just like was an overnight success, guys. I think that's also something I want to like highlight. So read a lot, so really understood, had a lot of knowledge base. He was tweeting a lot, writing a lot of content on Twitter, LinkedIn, personally on like blog. He would just send us summaries of books, be like, hey, this is an interesting idea I wrote. And he would just send it for me or like some of his friends to read, right? And he spent like a year to 2 years doing that before he started writing the newsletter. So a key thing here is that his strength, he was just getting better and better at writing and his muscle was growing. Second thing was he was getting better and better at conveying ideas to people who were maybe people who understood the space and have that communication with them. And then he started putting a lot of ideas publicly as well via Twitter and LinkedIn to get feedback from the broader ecosystem, just like you're putting things out in public. And those three things combined led to the outcome where like, hey, the newsletter became a huge success, right? So as you think about like personal ideas, the key thing here is that, hey, he built a muscle, a skill set, which is like, hey, how do you write well? How do you convey ideas well? How do you write them in a way that people actually want to read them and share with their friends? which takes time.
Yeah, agree, 100%, right? I think you want to build up an advantage and you want to sort of like flex that advantage. But again, I want to keep this like beginner friendly. Being completely honest, even if I did not have that audience, I could have validated that idea just by spending a couple $100 on Facebook ads and seeing what's up, right? So yeah, I think that's pretty much I have to say on the personal problem. Hassan, anything you want to add there?
No, I think like the one other method, which I think slightly also leads to the personal method I want to chat about, is the money trail method. Is trying to kind of like understand. You can find incredible business ideas simply by focusing on where the money is going, and that might just be like, hey, you saw like some startups get funded by VCs, or you saw like large companies signing contracts with certain customers. And the reason why I kind of talk about this method is that in around the personal problem method is that there could be an intersection. So one company I helped build called Semantic Health is an example of this. The personal method was my co-founder was a physician. He understood how medical coders and medical auditors operated because he spent so much time on the front line writing charts in electronic medical records, which is in essence a database for hospitals. And then these medical coders and auditors will review these charts to figure out like, hey, what are the billing codes which need to be assigned here? And then they will be sent to insurance companies. And for me, this was when I kind of like started chatting about it with him. It was like, hey, there's so much friction, there's so much data, there's so much inefficiencies. And I started following the money trail method in this situation. I looked at like, hey, there are like 2-3 other companies which have been funded. Revenue cycle and insurance is a massive space in North America. Hey, there could be something here. And we started like double clicking more and more. His personal approach of being a physician and being at the front line was very helpful because you were able to talk to other physicians. You were able to talk to medical coders and auditors and just shadow them. While the money trail method helped us understand how much money flows through this ecosystem. Like each hospital relies on the revenue cycle management space for hundreds and millions of dollars of their budget. If they mess this up, they can go bankrupt, especially in the US. So that led us to like build Semantic Health, which we ended up selling to a massive US company. So I think like, sometimes there are methods which can also intersect. You find a personal problem, there's a massive TAM. You see like there's actually a lot of money flowing through the flow of the idea you want to build. Because if you can put yourself in the money flow, massive opportunities can exist. So
Yeah. That's an interesting one you bring up, right? So like just to sort of make sure that I understand it. So the money trail method is basically you just want to look at all the startups that are getting funded in the space, right? And that becomes validation of whether this idea has potential. Right?
I'll just add like not even just startups getting funded, but also looking at what type of contracts companies are signing, which with early stage to pre-growth stage companies, right? Like innovative companies, because that will give you an indication of that, hey, there's real dollars who are buying something in the market. I think like generally just you need information. So TechCrunch is a great publication which mentions most of the rounds done. You can go to Chat GPT to ask questions. You can go to Google. You can go to Perplexity. And you can just like put in like the industry requirements or parameters and you will get like a list of companies.
Now, I want to add in a little bit around the contract stuff, right? So one method that I think if you want to see what kind of contracts are getting funded, just go to startups that have been founded within the last year when, whichever problem space you're looking at, just go look at the logos on their website, right? So if they have a bunch of big logos, that means that those companies are signing up with these startups and these startups are getting paid to solve that problem, right? Again, that is like massive validation just by looking at where the money is going. Now, you might not know what the exact value of that contract is, but you do know some money's gone that way, right? Someone had that problem and they were willing to pay to have that problem solved. That's one way to validate what's happening in the contract sense.
Yeah, like I always like, the Semantic Health example is one I will just like reiterate again here is that the reason why we ended up doing medical coding and auditing was that the data flow at a hospital was to that, which is very critical. Like having that data clean is super critical. And second, the input for the CFO depended on that data being good. So one aspect for us for Money Trail was that like, hey, can our product be part of either a cost cutting methodology or revenue generating activity? So when we looked at the money trail, we're like, hey, like if we build something for medical coding and auditing, if we make the data better, we can generate more money for the hospital. But even let's say we don't generate money for the hospital, but just making data better for them, we reduce costs for them because now this data is used for a lot of other use cases. So the friction goes away. So I think when you think about money trail method, you also have to look at it at a micro level. That what industry you're building, where would your product sit? Is it impacting a cost cutting thing? Is it a revenue creative thing? If you can do both, it's a golden opportunity. Because in growth times, revenue is king. Everyone's like trying to spend a lot of money to grow the revenue, but when recession hits, cost cutting becomes like a key thing. So if you can do both, you are a very valuable partner to an organization who you can help them in a lot of situations. So I think that's one way of also thinking about the money trail method.
So the final method that we have for finding $1 million business ideas is called the X for Y formula. Now you can sit down on your couch and you can think of 1 million different ideas, but that's hard. One of the best ways to find new ideas is to take existing ideas and apply them to a new domain. So earlier in this podcast, I talked about Jenny AI, basically these two college kids. They saw an early version of Chat GPT and they said, hey, what if we built this for students, right? We gave an example of Harvey AI earlier in the podcast, right? They basically looked at Chat GPT and they were like, hey, what if we built something similar to this for lawyers? So whenever you see a successful product or a product that's getting really big, you can always ask yourself the question, can I take this and apply this to a different industry, a different problem? When marketplaces came along early on, Uber for X became like a very popular idea, right? Like we're going to take Uber and we're going to build this for something else. So there were, Uber for houses, let's just call it Airbnb. There were, Uber for home services, Care.com, $1 billion company in the US.
Then also geography, a geography play as well, right? Like Kareem started in like MENA region. There was China had the DD cab, I think Ola cab in India, right? So like they were literally pretty much like Uber clones, but for different regions as well. And then there were a lot of scooter companies, I think across the globe as well. We started as well, different geography, and they were just the X of that in different city as well. I think Rocket Labs was a great example of that, which just used to copy something which was being done really well in the US and just go open it everywhere in different Europe and emerging markets.
So, different industries isn't just the only way to look this. Hassan talked about geographies. Honestly, it can even be things like gender, right? So, for example, there are a ton of huge companies that are geared specifically towards men or women. I know that there's this sort of like healthcare company called Hims. And what they basically do is, I think they help men with they kind of send you this package where you have this kind of hair growth solution because that's a problem that men have. And then there's, they have a sister company, might even be part of the same company called Hers as well, which is more, kind of like medical solutions geared towards women as well. So you can look at it across, right? So again, I'm in the newsletter business. There's another newsletter called, one of the biggest newsletters out there called The Skim. And The Skim is basically just a newsletter for women. It basically tells women what's happening in the markets, what's happening in politics, what's happening in media and so on. And it's just, more targeted towards what women care about or what women are interested in. So a ton of different ways that you can sort of, dissect it and apply your idea. So another way to find the X for Y thing is actually, let's just say you wanted to build a Chat GPT for X. Just go look at Chat GPT reviews and look for the 1-star and 2-star reviews for Chat GPT. So if, for example, you see a recurring pattern in those 1 and 2-star reviews, that might be an opportunity right there for you. So let's just take an example and say you are an academic or you're a student who are using ChatGPT for research. And let's just say ChatGPT isn't really doing the kind of research you want. Every time you ask ChatGPT a question, it might, surface media sources, whereas you might be looking for more academic sources. So if you keep getting that complaint, that right there is an opportunity for you to go build that X for Y. So that could be, ChatGPT for academia. Some startups, by the way, are doing this and they're pretty successful at this. But I think that's another very specific of applying the X for Y formula and finding a great business idea.
One quote I want to share from a person named Paul Bucket, who was the founder of Gmail and he was at Google. He kind of said that live in the future and then build what's missing. I think another thing you really need to get good at if you want to build good companies and have good ideas is like being observant, noticing things, right? You got to notice issues in around you, notice problems in your business, be able to ask questions to your colleagues, your managers, be like, hey, why are we not doing this? Why are we not spending money on this thing? We spend money on this, it didn't really work. Like, what is our alternative? So really have the curiosity, the be observant, go ask questions, and not kind of be fearful a lot of times, right? Because when you're kind of having these conversations, fear or being shy can be a big issue as well. So be open to that. And if you, like, let's say, are not an extrovert and you feel uncomfortable about that, I think Twitter is a great place. Like, there's a lot of conversation you can have. You can talk to people about these type of questions, but via a digital screen. I think that's another important thing.
Yeah, I think you definitely need to have that kind of problem identification glasses on all the time. So this is, by the way, guys, like this is something that Hassan and I do all the time, is every time we see a problem out there or an opportunity to build a product, we either hop on a call or we just send each other a voice note or a message, right? Like most of the time that Hassan and I spend with each other every week, and that's hours every week, is basically talking about different problems that we can solve. All right, folks, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and you want us to do more episodes like this, just shoot me an email at zain@superhuman.ai. That's ZAIN@superhuman.ai, and we'll definitely do more episodes like this. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you soon.